Hi, good afternoon, Barry. Good afternoon, Chairman, distinguished speakers, guests. Thank you for this opportunity to do this presentation. I'm just going to share my screen. You can let me know when you're seeing it.
We're seeing your screen. Go ahead.
All right, so I'm just going to do a brief presentation on the administrative and legal framework for redress and enforcement in Jamaica. Just a quick summary of the work of the CAC, or who we are. The Consumer Affairs Commission of Jamaica, we're a government agency, and we operate under the Ministry of Industry, Investment and Commerce.
Sacha, your slides haven't changed?
Oh, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Thanks, Barry. So we operate under the Ministry of Industry, Investment of Commerce and Commerce. The legislation that established the Consumer Affairs Commission of Jamaica is the 2005 Consumer Protection Act. And that act is what gives us the jurisdiction to do what we do in terms of investigating complaints and also conducting market research, amongst our other duties. The act was actually amended in 2012, and this amendment was primarily to establish the Consumer Protection Tribunal. There are 5 main functions of the Consumer Affairs Commission. We investigate breaches of the Consumer Protection Act. We promote other consumer organizations, such as the National Consumers League of Jamaica, otherwise known as the NCL. This body is a non-government organization that the CAC supports financially, and we provide other resources to them as well to assist with their advocacy on consumer rights and representation. We collect consumer information, and we actually have a research unit, and some of the functions of the research unit are price monitoring of critical goods and services. We do market surveillance, for example, of stores, supermarkets, petrol stations, to see if they're in compliance with the Consumer Protection Act. We conduct customer satisfaction surveys, and we also spearhead policies, consumer policies and standards. We do consumer education at the CAC as well, and this is done through different presentations through webinars. We attend expos, we present to children in schools, churches. We also meet with vendors and different service providers in an effort to educate them on the provisions of our legislation with the primary act, which is the Consumer Protection Act. And finally, dispute resolution. And this role is primarily carried out by the complaints officers. There's a complaint unit. And what they do is that they use mediation to resolve disputes between consumers and vendors. And we try to get the parties to meet to see if we can come to some sort of compromise between the parties for the complaint that was filed by the consumer. Briefly going to touch on how the Consumer Affairs Commission investigates breaches of the CPA. We encourage consumers to first speak with the vendor to try and resolve the dispute. And we encourage consumers to assemble all the facts, as they have a better chance of gaining redress if they have all their documents together, which would include their receipts. And if there's a contract, a written agreement, we ask them to provide that as well. And any other document that is relating to their complaint. If the dispute is not resolved at that stage, then we encourage consumers to file their complaint with the Consumer Affairs Commission for us to investigate the complaint. We actually have some partners, well, a number of other government organizations and institutions that we work with to assist us in our investigations or to gain information based on their experience. For example, the Bureau of Standards, the National Compliance Regulatory Authority. If we have a complaint where we have to send a sample for testing to see if the item, it might be concrete, whatever it is, if it's at a certain standard, we'll send it to the NCRA and ask for a report on the sample that we collected. We also liaise with the Fair Trading Commission on the complaints that we have. Sometimes we refer complaints to them and vice versa. And as a part of the investigation process, what the complaints officers will do is that they'll make copies of the documents in the possession of the consumer that is related to the complaint, so their receipts, their contracts, etc. They'll peruse those, and then they'll make contact with the vendor to basically give them information on the complaint that was filed and ask them if what happened, get their side of the story. And based on the information that is provided to us by the vendor, the complaints officer will be able to determine whether or not the act was breached. Once that determination is made, the officer will formally write to the vendor and ask them for redress, and they will quote the section of the act that was breached. If redress is not provided, then the matter may be referred to the Consumer Protection Tribunal. And what is key to note here is that the matter may be referred by either party. So a consumer can refer a matter to the tribunal if where a vendor is not providing them with redress. And a vendor can refer a matter to the tribunal if they want a determination on whether or not the CPA was actually breached. How does the Consumer Affairs Commission of Jamaica assist or help consumers and vendors in dispute resolution? All right, so mediation is conducted by complaints officers. And what this actually includes is arranging meetings between vendors and consumers. If successful, the consumer and vendor will enter into a formal arrangement to settle the dispute. However, if the dispute is not settled after mediation is conducted, then as I had stated before, either the consumer or the vendor may take the matter to the Consumer Protection Tribunal for determination to be made. I just want to briefly touch on some achievements of the Commission from April 2022 to March 2023. I'm going to go through these quickly. In terms of outreach activities, we spoke earlier about the consumer education, what our officers actually do here in terms of speaking to consumers through seminars and expos. 62,508 consumers were directly sensitized. In terms of complaints handled during that period, 1,348 complaints were handled with our 80% resolution rate, with 1,081 of those complaints being actually resolved. Advice or information provided, 444 consumer requests for advice were fulfilled. And this is really where consumers contact the CAC to gain more information on their rights and their responsibilities, or to ask us questions about the Consumer Protection Act. In terms of money secured for the period, we secured 49,700,000 Jamaican dollars on behalf of aggrieved consumers. Media exposures, 5,653 total exposures were secured during that period. 28 press surveys were conducted. And I also want to touch on the National Consumer Policy. This policy was really spearheaded by our research unit. What the policy aims to do is to really create a framework that promotes cooperation between the government and the business community. And going further, the policy aims to equip staff of consumer protection entities such as the Commission and the National Consumers League with the knowledge and skills required to deliver quality services to the consumers that we serve. I'm going to briefly discuss the Consumer Protection Consumer Protection Tribunal. This is a quasi-judicial body, as it can, amongst other things, make binding decisions. So it has similar authority to that of a court. However, a court may review a decision arising from the tribunal. So a decision can be challenged via judicial review. And this will really happen if a consumer or vendor is of the view that the tribunal did not fairly adjudicate or handle the complaint that was filed before it. If there was any procedural impropriety or anything like that in how the tribunal handle the matter, then the consumer or vendor may seek to have that decision file a judicial review application before the Supreme Court for that to be looked at and determined. The law actually requires that hearings should be placed before an independent and impartial tribunal. Therefore, it is important for us to note that the functions and the roles of the Consumer Protection Tribunal is separate and distinct from the functions of the Consumer Affairs Commission. So there are two separate and distinct entities that were established under the Consumer Protection Act. Currently, the tribunal has 7 members. However, when there are hearings, 3 members will sit on the panel. I just want to briefly touch on new matters which have been filed before the courts, tribunal, and the Supreme Court, tribunal, and parish court over a 5-year period. So these are new matters which were filed. 2 cases were filed before the Supreme Court. 1 case was actually settled after the case management hearing, and the other matter was an application for judicial review of a decision made by the tribunal, and that matter was subsequently settled. 3 cases were filed before the tribunal, and the tribunal granted decisions in all 3 of those matters. And in relation to the parish court, 2 cases were filed in which the CSE were involved in those cases, and that's for the criminal division of the parish court, and both cases are ongoing. And I just want to provide some more information here in relation to our involvement in these 2 cases. The CAC often provides support to consumers who have been victims of fraud through their consumer purchases, in that we refer persons to the fraud squad, which is actually a unit of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, and the matters are investigated and then placed before the parish court, formerly called the Resident Magistrates Court. The director of that business, or the business owner, is charged, and the matter goes through the routine prosecution process. The police may charge the business owner or the director under the CPA, which is the Consumer Protection Act. However, they may charge them, for example, for fraudulent conversion under the Larceny Act, where, for example, a vendor takes money from a consumer to provide goods and services and then does not in fact deliver the item. So that's an example of how we work with the team at the fraud squad to prosecute vendors who engage in that kind of activity and do not give consumers what they have in fact paid for. Want to briefly touch on some challenges that we experience in enforcement. So enforcement of tribunal judgments. Section 44G of the Consumer Protection Act details what happens when a vendor fails to comply with an order of the tribunal, and it's summarized here. It says, Section 44G, any person who fails to comply with an order of the tribunal commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction before a resident magistrate, now called parish court, to a fine not exceeding $2 million or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years, or to both such fine and imprisonment. So essentially, what is happening here is, if the tribunal makes an order and a vendor does not comply with the order, the director may be placed before the parish court, prosecuted, and charged a fine. The fine, of course, is payable to the government if the person is convicted. However, this is not necessarily desirable because it lengthens the amount of time before the consumer is provided with redress. And as my colleague stated earlier, Mr. Freeman, litigation is not always necessarily the best option. So, we really have to, after we've executed and done all other avenues, and the consumer still has not been provided with redress, that we may try to go in this direction. Another challenge that is faced is enforcement of parish court decisions and even Supreme Court decisions, where we find that limited liability companies have no access to seize, well, so they don't satisfy the judgment of the court, and there are no access to seize and sell. And so you find yourself having to go the direction of instituting garnishee proceedings or insolvency proceedings against the company, undesirable length of time that that's going to take. Or if you're brave enough, you might seek to try and pierce the corporate veil of the company. But you know, at the end of the day, the main goal here is really to claim redress on behalf of the consumer, to get them their refund, to get them your replacement or repair, whatever it is that is best for the consumer who has suffered. That is really the goal here. It's not to litigate for years and years, and it's not to drag out the whole thing. But if we have to, these are other avenues which can be considered. This is the end of my presentation. I want to thank you for listening. I'm not sure if there are any questions, but thank you. Barry, back to you. Thanks.